So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Charles Small. I'm the director of ISGAP, which is the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. I'm originally from Montreal and I went to McGill as an undergraduate student, so it's nice to be back. ISGAP, our main office is in New York City, but we're doing programming at McGill. This is the first event during the academic year. We're going to have seminars throughout the year. We're also doing the same at the Harvard Law School, Stanford University, and Fordham University in Manhattan. And we're also going to be doing programming in Europe, in Paris, in Warsaw. We're doing work as well in Israel. And the purpose of what we're trying to achieve, and I'm going to give you a short introduction before we have our eminent scholar that we've come to hear. Basically, ISGAP is trying to put on the map the study of anti-Semitism. And amazingly, and I won't go into a long discourse, but there are people studying anti-Semitism, mostly in its historical context, but very few scholars are dealing with the contemporary context, and there are very few institutional frameworks, if you will, institutes, research centers, dealing with contemporary anti-Semitism. In fact, I was part of the group that started a program at Yale. It was the first research center on anti-Semitism ever at a North American university, which ought to be a study in and of itself. And it's time now that people engage the study of anti-Semitism in the academy, in the media. Contemporary anti-Semitism is a taboo. That if you engage contemporary issues of anti-Semitism, that somehow you're a neoconservative, you're a neocon, you're an advocate and not an academic or a scholar, you're not objective, somehow you're Islamophobic. And this type of political correctness is dangerous not just to the Jews. And if you think about it, anti-Semitism at a moral and an ethical level is not a Jewish problem. Ethically, hatred is a problem for those who hate. And yes, Jews suffer and have suffered from this hatred, but on a moral and philosophical level, it's not a Jewish problem. And anti-Semitism, if you study it historically, there are many instances in which anti-Semitism begins with Jews, but it never ends with Jews. This is a human rights issue. If you're concerned about religious pluralism, democratic principles, the notion of strong citizenship, the rights of religious minorities, the rights of women, the rights of gay people. This is a basic human rights issue that ought to be at the forefront of the agenda in the academy, the research agenda, and in the media, and the like. The rise of radical political Islam, I am not speaking about Muslims, I am not speaking about Islam, but radical jihadist Islam has as its fuel, the fuel which is firing the social movement, which is gaining more and more power, uses anti-Semitism as a vehicle to attract supporters. And without being melodramatic, and I'm choosing my words carefully and scientifically, that this anti-Semitism is genocidal. It's genocidal. The revolutionary regime of Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, in which some liberals claim it's just a bump in the road or they're moderates, these people openly and consistently and clearly are out to eradicate the self-determination of Jewish people in Israel, and they're out to exterminate Jews. If you listen to the speeches of Taladari, the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, he's clear and he's unequivocal. If you look at the Iranian revolutionary regime, not the Iranian people, but the regime, they're clear and unequivocal. And we in the West are putting our heads in the sand. We in the West, when a scholar gets up and starts to study these issues, they become marginalized, they are accused of all sorts of things. Hopefully, through these seminar series of high caliber scholarship, we have some of the leading scholars in the world coming to McGill, to Fordham, to Stanford, to Harvard, to deal with these issues at the highest caliber of scholarship and intellectual inquiry. Hopefully students and other academic colleagues will begin to engage this issue seriously, to debate it, to discuss it, to argue, to write, to do research, to argue in the classroom and to go into the pub and to continue the argument, vigorous arguments. And we need to wake people up, because as we speak, we've been doing this now since 2004, and we can see the rise of radical Islam is just off the charts. And if I was telling somebody earlier in the lobby, if I would have told you 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that the American government, the American administration would be supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, you would tell me I'm crazy. And yet, the American government is supporting the Brotherhood with aid, the Egyptian government. They help to train them, and I urge you to look at the Obama speech of 2009, which will go down in history as something more detrimental, more powerful, more damaging than the speech that Churchill gave when he came back from Germany.
Chamberlain.
Sorry, not Churchill. Chamberlain. Thank you.
Well, they said.
Chamberlain. That this, and you should go home tonight and watch this on YouTube and think about what was discussed and what was said. We need to analyze, to do research, to do publications, and to create awareness. So first of all, we're having our first lecture today with Professor Sibony, Daniel Sibony. I would like to introduce to you Raphael Fischler, who's a professor at McGill. So Raphael is a colleague and an old friend, and Raphael will be hosting the seminar series at McGill, which will take place roughly every 2 weeks in the Leacock building. In 2 weeks, we have Jonathan Spire, who's a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. He's a professor at the IDC in Herzliya. He just snuck in twice to Syria and is reporting amazing stuff in Syria and the contemporary carnage that takes place as we speak. And he'll be here in 2 weeks. He's a serious scholar. So I'm hopeful that this is our launch. I'm hopeful that the people here will come back for other events. The program is very good at McGill. And to become a part of a group of intellectuals that if you care about human rights, forget about Israel, forget about the Jews, forget about anti-Semitism for a moment. If you care about human rights, if you care about citizenship and democratic principles, if you care about the reproductive rights of women and the rights of all citizens in the United States and North America to marry anybody who they love, as the Democratic Party based their convention on, then we need to be very concerned about what's going on in the Middle East and around the world, because women in those countries ought to have the same rights as women in this country. And these are very pressing issues. Reactionary movements are reactionary movements. I hope that through this seminar series that we can connect scholars in different parts of the world, different parts of North America, and try to begin to discuss, to understand these changes which are taking place in the world, in the Middle East, in Europe, in East Africa, in West Africa, literally all over the world. We need to understand what's happening. We need to engage it, discuss it, and analyze it. Today, we have it's an amazing honor for us that Professor Daniel Sibony is here. And he's the first speaker of the seminar series at McGill, the launch of ISGAP here in McGill. Daniel Sibony is an amazing scholar. He's a writer, he's a philosopher, he's a psychoanalyst, and a mathematician. He has PhDs in all of these disciplines. He studied with pioneering scholars such as the great philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who was on his doctorate committee, who he knew and studied with and wrote a critique of. He also worked with Jacques Lacan. He holds a PhD in mathematics from the University of Paris and a doctorate in philosophy, which he received under Levinas. He also trained in psychoanalysis by the pioneering Jacques Lacan, and he taught at the University of Paris from 1963 to 2000. Dr. Sibony divides his time between psychoanalysis research, practice, lecturing, and writing. He's written more than 37 books, some of which are on sale here, including Creation, an essay on contemporary art, the Enigma, the Antisemitism, the Enigma of Anti-Semitism, He's written on issues of racism, identity and hatred, and the like. So this is very much, the issues tonight are very much a part of his expertise. So it's really an honor to have Dr. Sibony.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak about a subject. I worked a lot about it. And I'll try to give some lights and to show you how this subject is complex, complicated. And after that, I will show you how it is very simple. But before, you have to hear the complexity. First of all, the word anti-Semitism is not the right word, because you can hear a lot of people in Arab countries saying, how could we be anti-Semitic? We are Semitic. So the expression is incorrect, but well, let's keep it as a lot of other inadequate expressions. I think the right expression could be the vindicacy or the hatred or the aggressivity towards the Jewish people, the whole, as a whole. Not towards individuals, because, for instance, in Morocco, where I lived, we had a secondary status. We were living under scorn, we can say, but we were respected as individuals. But when the Jewish people has had opportunity, for instance, to go to Israel or to go to other countries, then something more violent appeared. And it is exactly what I would like to enlighten. What is interesting in anti-Semitism is not exactly the target, but the motivation of the people who feel this affect, this anti-Semitic affect. Because the target, of course, is paradoxical. The Jewish identity is impossible to define. Because you can find a Jewish from New York, a businessman, a Jewish in Ukraine, a Jewish in Tunisia, and they don't fit. They have not a religious Jewish, an unreligious one, a Zionist one, an anti-Zionist one. So you cannot define, and usually people define Jewish identity as religion. This is a deep mistake, because there are a lot of Jewish that are not religious. For instance, in Islamic countries, usually people think that Jewish is a religion. Once I was in Morocco, and I discussed with the taxi man, and he told me, oh, you are Jewish? I speak Arabic because I was born in Marrakesh and came to Paris at 13. And he told me, oh, Jewish, we are cousins. We have the same God. I told him, because I was wanted to speak, I told him, I'm not sure it is the same God. And he told, yes, but our cousin, you are a religion. And I said, no, we are not a religion. What do you think about the masses of Jewish that has been exterminated by the Nazis and that were not religious? And he answered me, yes, but this is the mistake of the Nazis. So for him, it was evident it is religion. Of course, it's not. And this is included in a lot of contradictions of this identity, which seems talented to exist despite its contradictions. And maybe this is the first reason for the anti-Semitic hatred. I even can tell that if you, a man or a woman, if you feel that somebody hates you, not because you have done this or that, but just because of your existence, because you exist, you can feel the significance of the hatred against Jewish people, because Jewish people exist despite all the contradictions, all the obstacles, all the catastrophes. And in a certain sense, I could say that anti-Semitism exists from the beginning of the Jewish people. It means that even inside the Jewish people, there are expressions, currents against himself. And this seems to be very interesting, because maybe it is the unique, the sole identity that I know who affirms itself, who poses itself as existent, and who fights against itself. You cannot give me another example of an identity who can show its fundamental book, let's say the Bible, and you open it, and 3 pages on 4 are violence against Jewish people. Because he doesn't listen, he doesn't behave well, he doesn't, he's not faithful, he's traitor, things like that. So it's an identity that tries to exist, including its failures, and the big failure that the Jewish people has brought with him is the invention of that God. Because inventing a God that is called the being, or being, Yahweh, Yud-He-Vav-He, the tetragram, inventing that God was almost crazy. Because you invent, or you create, or you imagine that God. If you imagine that God, you are already guilty. Because whatever you do, it's not exactly well done. And for this, from the first pages of the book, there are strong and violent words against that people. So, we have a strange identity with a lot of contradictions, an identity who can speak against herself, but maintain herself. And in my latest book, I called that movement From Identity to Existence. That means that a lot of people, a lot of groups try to have a good identity, an identity without too much holes, without too much failures. And when they have a failure, they usually project it on the other. They say, we fail in that case because of this one and this. So the natural effort is to have a complete identity, a stable identity. When it is not stable, the person gets nervous. And I can find this even among Jewish, of course. I often hear Jewish saying to me, well, it's difficult to bear that exploded identity with so much parts. I can say, well, try to do your best. It can be fruitful to have an identity like a mosaic with a lot of possibilities. Try to play your play of life. Yes, but it's very difficult. There is almost a joke, a Jewish joke, where someone comes to raise funds, and he says, well, funds for what? For studying the Torah. Oh, very nice. How much you want? Yeah, well, $1 million. Listen, I give you 2 million, and you bring back this Torah from where you have taken it. It means that it brings problems, a lot of problems. But it brings also to that identity I could say the impulsion to confront problems, to raise questions about oneself, about the other, about... normally, a Jewish cannot be... comment on dit d'accord avec lui-même? Cannot really agree with itself, with himself. He cannot. There is also a joke of Robinson Crusoe, who was showing his island, and when they rescued him, and he showed a synagogue, oh, wonderful. And the second one, and he said, in this one, I never enter. It is that the contradiction is really deep. Now, it means that this identity, these people, has a very strange history. If you read the history of the Hebrews in the Bible, you will see a lot of wars, of crises, of fighting. It's never peaceful because this identity is surrounded by people who don't like an unstable identity. So now I put my first idea. When an identity cannot bear its own contradictions, it has the beginning of a strong aggressivity towards Jewish identity. This is evident. For instance, with the Nazis, it is very clear. Hitler has told we have to kill the Jewish in ourselves. It means that we have a beautiful Aryan identity, and these people are spoiling it with their contradiction, with their... We have to erase them. Well, it means that one of the aspects of anti-Semitism is the project of building a stable, well-defined identity, which excludes a strange identity which is at the same time singular and universal. I call it singularly universal, which means that they try to solve a singular problem in an universal way, but they always remain singular. So, you have to know that this violence against Jewish people, we have traces of it. It's testified by text very long time earlier than the beginning of the two others religions. It means that every people gives his own character to that problem towards Jewish identity. For instance, Christianity has been a lot aggressive against Jewish people because it began by solving the problem of existence. That was the problem of Jewish people, which was a failure between past and future, a failure between what we are and what we could be, between God and mankind. And so Christianity has solved the problem. God has sent his Son, and his Son has taken on himself all your failures. Well, the problem is solved. So, Jewish people is useless. Why does he remain? And I could say another aspect of anti-Semitism is the aggressive surprise when you see someone or some group who is supposed to be dead and who remains alive. Because after the Shoah, some people could think, well, they are still here. And they are supposed, the problem was supposed to be solved. Another can say, well, they have their country, what do they do here? Yes, it could be a solution. But at every time there is the idea, the structure of this idea. There is a German word which is unheimlich. Unheimlich, uncanny. Jewish is uncanny. Unheimlich because it is supposed to be aside and it remains on the scenery. With the Islam, it is almost the same problem, a little different, because Islam has, in a certain sense, also solved the problem of the relation with life, with God. He says, with the being, he says, everyone is submitted to God. And submission is exactly the significance of the word Islam in Arabic. So, when you are submitted, you are Islamic. This is the fundamental idea. This shows also that it's very logical that in the Quran, most of the the biblical heroes are Muslim. Of course, because they are submitted to God. a lot of people do not know that aspect. Which means that if you reject that message, and of course the Jewish people has not accepted that solution, said we stay as we are. So they are uncanny, they are strange, they are not in the right way. I can give you an example, very, very precise, of the kind of problems that this creates in the Islamic area. For instance, in the Quran, there is 1 or 2 verses that alludes to Jerusalem, but not naming Jerusalem, like in the Bible, just saying, and that night I saw the farthest mosque. La mosquée lointaine. How do you say?
Faraway mosque.
The faraway mosque. Of course, people explain, Islamic experts explain that faraway mosque was the Temple of Jerusalem, because there was not a mosque at the time of Muhammad. Okay? But you can understand that if Moses is Muslim, of course the temple can be a mosque. Okay? But when the... What? Oui, mais ça c'est en 600 et quelques, quand le Coran a été écrit, bien sûr, mais il a eu la vision. C'est une vision. Voilà. Donc, Mahomet a eu la vision, has had the vision of a faraway mosque. But when the Muslim troops conquered Jerusalem, they built a mosque on the place of the temple, and they called it the faraway mosque. Al-Aqsa. It comes from that verse of the Quran. So you see, there is an integration of the Jewish message. That is, the Quran builds a new identity which includes all what was before, so that he solves the contradiction. Of course, life gives some shocks to that kind of solution, and we know the effects of history, because but you have to imagine, for instance, imagine a Muslim child who is raised in the Quran. He loves Muhammad, of course. Muhammad is at the top of all the values. And he hears that Jewish has rejected that man. When he meets real Jewish in the street, he has a strange feeling of people who had rejected the top of the values. So it's really an existential problem. By the way, the question that has been raised before by Michael is why today studies on anti-Semitism are taboo. You can now get the solution. It's evident, because Islam has a big problem with Jewish people, because he has solved the question of the Jewish people. Jewish people is useless and is repressed, has not to be on the scenery because he normally is submitted. Normally, Jewish people is Islamic. If he is not, these are traitors. But in usual life, you meet Jewish people, you meet their state. And the problem is that in the Western world, there is a great deal of Islamophobia. Not in the usual sense that people don't love Islamic people or Muslims. It's not in that sense. It is in the sense that the establishment and people fear to speak about subjects that can raise a problem for Islamic people. This is Islamophobia. And maybe this will evolve and this will change, but till now there is Islamophobia, which means you want to study anti-Semitism. It's not this subject will raise problems with Islam. Please don't do it. Of course, we don't hate Jewish. We love you. But please don't do it. Go away. And for this, you have like an appearance of anti-Semitism. But it's not anti-Semitism. I don't think so. I think it's phobia towards Islamic world. Because Islamic world has a great problem with that people, because with the Jewish people, because all his text is constructed upon the Bible to include it. If the inclusion doesn't work, doesn't fit, there is a great deal of anger. Who are these guys who are solved? Their problem is solved in our text, but they remain alive and they remain as they want to be. This is, in a certain sense, unbearable. Of course, in life solves a lot of problems. There is always, in Islamic space, a coexistence between a conviviality, that is, we can laugh, we can drink, we can eat, we can work together without any problem. But if the fundamentals, if someone, for instance, is critical to something, for instance, if he makes caricatures, it is impossible. If he writes the fantasy of the Prophet Muhammad in like Salman Rushdie, it is impossible. So we have the big Islamic identity which wants to be stable, to be complete, which is perfect in a certain sense. Because if you are submitted, the others are the unsubmitted. The others are those who create problems. Who are, in Arabic, it's kafirin. Kafirin is traitors. So, you can extend this analysis to a more general frame, and we can say that Jewish people is an objection to any kind of perfect identity. And he is the first example of imperfect identity. That is, of an identity which cannot solve its contradictions. This is very interesting. I think it's a unique case in history of an identity who shows you his book, the Bible, and show you see all that laws, we are unable to fulfill them. Oh, nice to meet you. But what people want to hear is, see, look at our laws. We are proud of them. But we are proud of being unable to fulfill them, but to maintain the link with them. To maintain that transmission. Well, but this is exactly what happens in life with individuals. I think that the narcissistic aggressivity of an individual towards another, towards you, raises when he sees that your existence can be an objection to his narcissism, to his perfection, to his dream of perfection. So he can get aggressive. You have done nothing, but your way of existing with a lot of contradictions, with dreams, fulfillments, failures, all that, seemed to him very strange. So he can enter in deep anxiety, maybe in phobia. He doesn't want to meet you. Now, I will give you another example. You have written a book. And in this book, you have put all the best of your thoughts, of your life, of what you are. And it has not been a bestseller, but it had a reasonable success. Comes another one who takes parts of your book and he builds a bestseller, a world bestseller, a very well known book. The result is that that man don't want to meet you in the cocktail for his book. Why? Because you have been between him and the idea that you got before, but that has been fruitful in his hands. See? This is exactly what appears in a lot of situations. I call this the second first complex. I will explain it. That is, you are the first, but when a second comes, he wants to take your place. He could say, I read the book of Mr. X, and I found it interesting, but I will present you another version. This is my version. It could be. But what he wants is to hide you, to remove you, to be the first who has written that things. This is what happened with that poor guys with their Bible. They come, they study it, it's not a big success, but even among them, but it's a book. And come some other people who say, no, it's not. The real version is this one. And for instance, I can give you examples. I read somewhere in Islamic study that the Quran corrects the Bible in a lot of aspects. For instance, in the Bible, the King Solomon has built the Temple of Jerusalem, of course. But he has also built a temple for the idolatric cult for his women. It's written, well, he was not very strong relatively to sexual pulsions. It can happen, even to him. So he built the temple. The Islamic tradition said it cannot be. He has made mistakes, but he has regretted them, and he has been forgiven. You cannot write that Solomon has failed. So it's like a project to repair the failures, even for people. And this can create a lot of difficulties because life is not so idealistic. I think the Bible is a great book because you have nobody there to identify with. But maybe later you can identify with Jesus because he is beautiful, he solves, he takes, he forgives. But in the Bible, everyone fails one moment or the other. But the book is really close to life. It's a good book. I suggest you to read. So, in a certain sense, anti-Semitism, the feeling towards a problematic identity, like Jewish identity, could be an opportunity to analyze what is the problem for the perfect identity. And I think that this now comes closer and closer to existential problems, that is, individuals. Every one of you is a small Jewish people. That is an identity with a lot of contradictions that can tolerate another identity with a lot of contradictions, but that can not tolerate it, that can be violent. Yes, you have said this, it's impossible, and it can begin to fight with you because your existence is to a stable identity. So what could we, I prefer stop and hear your question, but for 2 or 3 minutes, what could we hope? What could we hope with that kind of situation? Of course, when I said that there is a phobia, when someone is phobic, you cannot do a lot. You are really without any power. You have to wait or to work so that his fear, his phobia can diminish so that he can speak. Because someone who is phobic, and now in Western world there is a phobia of what? And you can understand it, a phobia of what could happen if you speak, even without being critical, even only in studying problems, in playing with some concepts. You are a director of a theater in Manhattan. You had one of your, in the play there was Mohammed. The director removed. No, please, don't speak about it. We don't want problems. But Jewish identity is a problem and is a symbol of the existential problem of everyone. Thank you.
Is it possible that there was a phase in Judaism, I'm thinking with Moses, with the notion that Jews would be a nation of
you have to know that even in the texts about involving Moses, the idea of perfection was always an idea, no more. Because at the very beginning, they fail. The episode of the, comment on dit, le veau d'or? Yeah, the golden calf is very interesting. They received the law. They are supposed to receive the law in a volcanic eruption in the Sinai. So they are very close to the truth, to the perfection. 3 weeks later, they build a golden calf. What is that? This is human being. No more. That is, and the Bible tries to deal with that, to work with that. And even in his last poem, Moses says, you are a very, very difficult people. I know that you will fail after my death, as you failed before my death. He says that, it's written. So, it's not a project of the idea of perfection is always a project for everybody of us. Every morning we try to be better, but we fail. What do you do with that failure? This is the interesting problem. McGill.
I have a question. In the United States, the notion of tikkun olam is a very important part of Jewish identity in the United States. Some even argue it's a form of idolatry. It's replacing Hashem as something to worship, in a sense. How does this then, this notion of perfecting the world, connect to American Jewry's uncertain relationship with Israel, which is not perfect, which is problematic, which is becoming the Jew among nations? Do you see some sort of tension between Israel and this notion of tikkun olam in the American Jewish community?
Yeah, I think the problem of Israel is brings another difficulty. Because the usual objection against Israel is not that Israel is imperfect, because of course Israel is imperfect. What country is perfect? But the real objection is Israel has been built on an Arabic land by Jewish who had nothing to do with that place, and they took a part of land of the others, and this is unjust. This is the usual. So let us attack or criticize Israel for its imperfection, but usually it is for its existence. This is an interesting symbolic question, because first, what is the link of Jewish people with that land? Of course, if you are a naive believer, you can say God has promised that land to these people. Finished. Problem is solved. But you have to interpret it. To what does it mean for someone who doesn't believe in that or in God? What does it mean? I suggest an idea. The idea is that in the old times, there was a people who has built himself upon the idea that there is love for him in the being, in life, and that second, this will create for him a lot of problems. Because if you look loved by life, by the being, the others are not very happy with that. They want to find where you have taken that love, and they can spoil your life just to show you that you are not loved by life. So, but in that transmission of love of life, love of being, there was the idea that we are supposed to be in that place. That place is ours. Well, but if you say, that place is mine, it has no words. But if you say, that place is ours, and you transmit it to your children. If your children transmit this to their children, after 3 or 4 generations, and of course after 20, 30 generations, nobody else can build sovereignty in that place. And this is what happened. Jerusalem, nobody in the history, since the old Hebrews, nobody has been able to build this city as, let's say, a capital or something wonderful. There has been an episode with les Croisades, Crusade. They came, they wanted their ideal, the city of Jesus. They were defeated, and after their defeat, nothing was done by this city. So there is a relation that I call of possession. Possession, that is, for instance, if you have a jewel that your mother has given to you, and she says that her mother has given it to her, and the mother of the mother has given, and this jewel comes from centuries to you. It's like a sacred. You not only you possess that jewel, but you are possessed by it. Jewish people has that kind of link with that earth. And of course, this is a problem for Muslim believers, which means all Muslims, because when they see that that link has been finished by the Islamic solution, they say, what are you doing here? So it is the rivalry between two symbolic transmissions, the Jewish one, the Islamic one, that derives from the Jewish one, because as I told, Quran is built from the Bible, and this is a problem. So the imperfection of Israel, I think, is very often included in this, its unbearable existence for some people. Just a moment about Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is repairing the world, is improving the world. Of course, it's an idea which is not in the Bible, but it is in the tradition. Of course, it's a problematic idea, as every Jewish idea. It's problematic because you try to improve the world, but of course you have to improve yourself at the same time. So if you are a bad man that tries to improve the world, it can create problem. If you are a good man that fails to improve himself and fails also to improve the world, it can work as a project, an ideal project. Try to improve. Well, please.
It was interesting to hear you speak about anti-Semitism in the 21st century. I wonder if you could have given the same speech in Spain in the 14th century. The reason I'm asking is the Jews and the Sephardim lived very happily with each other for centuries. So how do you explain that anti-Semitism suddenly blew apart in the 21st century? It became another type of anti-Semitism.
Oh,
It's,
I understand. First, I suppose you know that in Spain, till the 14th century, in a very small period, there was a certain kind of tolerance because, I can say, of the happiness of the king. Sovereignty, Muslim sovereignty, was happy, was satisfied, had no problem that contests, that shakes its power. It had not the feeling of a danger. And when the danger came, it came for both, for Arabs and Jewish. They were expelled. But before, they were in a tolerance. You cannot also idealize, because you have to know that Jewish were in a dhimmi status, which is inferior, but it was sufficient for them. And there was a conviviality that cannot be idealized, but was good. But when the sovereign is in danger, it's finished. For instance, Jewish people has lived in Morocco long before the Arab came. I found manuscripts in my name a century before the year 1000. So it was a real presence of Jewish people there. But when, for instance, there were the war of 48 in the Middle East, it became difficult for the Jewish, because there were Jewish guys in the Middle East who were fighting against Arabics, and it is impossible to think it, because Jewish people had to be very humble, very, very low. How could they fight and even win? So there was a wave of Jewish that went away. After, in 1967, there was another wave, stronger. How could they fight in 6 days? So when the sovereignty, when the identity is quiet, happy, no problem, with another identity, even if it is problematic. You say, oh, they are very strange, the guys, that Jewish. But when the identity feels unstable, and this is the case of the Muslim world, in the whole globe, in the 21st century. So it goes back to its fundamental, and in its fundamental, they find a real deep problem with this Jewish identity, with these people. And it can be expressed in very simple ways. For instance, you can hear now, in 2012, a very important imam saying, well, Jewish people, we love you, we have nothing against you, but please tell us why is it on Arabic land that you have to take your state of Israel. Take it elsewhere. Why have we to pay for the Shoah, for what Europe did? So you can explain to him, but please, you know by your Quran that there is a link of possession between that people and that land. He says, no, this is an old history. nowadays Jewish people has nothing to do with that. But the paradox of Jewish people is that it maintains the link despite all difficulties. And there is a link, even if a Jewish of 21st century would not recognize a Jewish of 14th century. But there is a link. That's, yes?
Hitler wrote Mein Kampf and told the world exactly what he planned for the Jewish people. In the 21st century, the radical Islamists talked clearly. They tell the world our goal is global domination under the one true God, Allah, with Sharia law. And my question is, where do you see the Jewish people being in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years? Because the Jew in the diaspora has been trained that Israel is in a bad way, and we have to make them upbeat, and we have
to make a
campaigns to make money potential target for bad things, that only Israel is the target, being surrounded by their Arab brothers. They don't realize, the Jews in the diaspora, I think the majority feel themselves to be living, they're Americans, they're French, they're Italians, they're safe, but now we see that the target of the global Islamists is the Jew everywhere, as well as the infidel everywhere. Where do you see us being in 10, 20, and 30 years?
Now you ask me, yes, like a prophecy. I have not received a prophecy about that subject, but what I can tell you is that at every time of history, and now more than before, the situation of the Jewish people, Israel, diaspora, things like that, is like a barometer of the maturity of the surrounding space. It has been always like that. So your question is, will the surrounding space in America, in Europe, etc., will it surmonter, comment dire, overcome his fear or not? I don't know. What I can say is that fear and phobia is a very perverse position, because when someone is caught in phobia, he can exaggerate the reason of the phobia. That, oh, I'm afraid. You can say, no, please, you can come with me. There is no danger. Look at me. No, it's terrible. This, I don't know to what level the media, the government, the culture are ready to overcome that kind of perverse strategy. Maybe some traditional anti-Semitic in Western world can use that opportunity to hide behind Islamic violence against Jewish people. Maybe not. I think the game is open, really open, and I think it really depends on your understanding of the question and on your ability to make the other understand the stakes.
I want to go back to the first part of your lecture, and because you said that people can't face the contradictions, the pluralism, the mosaic that we want, we are, and that we want to remain as we are. But how does it explain that exactly when we are more assimilated and were more all over the society, and no phobia at all, as in Germany. We had exactly no phobia at all. We had the Holocaust, the Shoah.
It is very, very evident because the Jewish that were assimilated were perceived as hidden inside the identity, like a microbe, like a virus, inside, deep inside. So it raised for the Aryan, Nazi, German identity, it raised a very violent anxiety. So you have to take them from the place where they were supposed to hide. But for them, the Jewish were not hiding. They were living. They were just living with the others. But if the other has it means that the real globalization is not what they tell it to be. The real globalization is the solidarity. You are responsible of the maturity around you. That is, if you are surrounded by stable identities that cannot accept some kind of problems, you have to be aware. It can be dangerous for you and for others, and for itself. Because those who suffer from a stable, closed identity are also the people who are inside that identity. Yes?
I'm coming from a different perspective. I've always been an activist for Jewish causes. And when the Soviet Jewry movement started, the man on the street, the Jewish students, Jewish people, what did we do? We demonstrated, we worked on behalf of getting the Jews out of the Soviet Union. What are we doing? I go to synagogue in Yom Kippur, our rabbi tells us, be careful as Jews, watch out as Jews, be careful, it's very dangerous for us. The schools have all kinds of security, etc., etc. But what are we doing as individuals? What can we do? Everybody's talking about it, but nobody seems to be doing any grassroots work to try and stand up and fight this.
I cannot give you a program. You are living. Where are you living?
In Montreal.
In Montreal. Try to find what you want to express. You will encounter the obstacles very fast, very evidently, and you will have to cross over, to overcome the obstacles. I don't give you a program. I don't know you. Maybe you are an Orthodox religious woman and you want to promote another deeper approach to tradition. Please try to do it. You will find obstacles. Maybe you are a Zionist that want to promote the strength and development of Israel state. Please try. You will find what I say is you will find the obstacles and you will try to solve.
Why are the Jews so afraid now? Why? Why are they standing up and doing something? I don't know. I haven't got an answer. I'm trying to form something, and nothing seems to be working. Everybody, no, we have to keep quiet. We should hide. Be careful, etc.
Okay.
That's all a bunch of.
I think I am not afraid. If you want my own feeling, I'm not afraid. But maybe I have been raised in a context where I told you I was surrounded by scornful, arrogant people who were despising you. And I was very young, and this didn't make me suffer. I just wondered why they were so expressing so great scorn, who they are and who we are, and this made me think deeper, but I never felt fear. really about that kind of problem. Maybe I'm not a fearful man, but it depends. I think people can remind some events of the history. I think there is a real problem, but for me the problem doesn't come from Islam, doesn't come from fundamentalism, from radical Islam, for me, because it's normal that in Islam people look for the roots, for the fundamentals. They take them, they behold them, they say, we want that. It's normal, it's their identity. What puts me a problem is the attitude of the others. That if the others prevent you from speaking, for instance, from doing caricatures. I have read terrible articles in the press in France. I read after the caricatures of Charlie Hebdo, I read an article by an Muslim writer, famous, called Ben Jelloun. He said, liberty is sacred. We live in a country where liberty of expression is an absolute value that we cannot discuss it. So you read, you are happy, and you follow, and you find. But was it necessary to put oil on the fire? You wonder. But if the fire is lit since centuries and is supposed to be lit for centuries, if you have to shut up in order not to put to make this fire more vivid, so the liberty is finished. And he concludes his article by saying, anyhow, Mahomet was not in the caricatures, because Mahomet is not a person. It is a transcendence, a spirit. So when you read this in a text by a rational person, you can get scared. You can say, who are the people who forbid another expression and allow this one? This is the reason that I can fear. I fear from cowardice of the surrounding space, not of Islam. I don't fear even fundamentalists. This is my point of view.
More questions?
Yes, what you want?
Professor Fischler, and the person.
Thank you very much for your talk. You mentioned globalization at the end, and there is a thesis that's being put forward by Jacques Attali and other people that globalization is producing a new type of being, which is the nomad, which the Jew used to embody. And so, to caricature a little bit or to simplify, you could hope that globalization is going to produce more Jews, in the sense of people who are dealing with multiple identities, mosaic identities, with rootlessness or placelessness. Do you see that as a valid point? Do you see that as a point that can actually help in this situation?
I never understood what he means, but I have not time to read him. What does he mean by nomad? Because nomad, for me, I knew them, I lived with them in Morocco. Nomad are very stable people. They come, they start from a point, they arrive to the other point, after they come back exactly the same way. So, I don't know, but in Europe there is a mode of nomad. You will find intellectuals that are very settled in their life, in their work, and they say, we are nomad. Okay. It doesn't disturb me. On the other hand, I think that this is the purpose of this book, From Identity to Existence. It is to explain that the value for me of Jewish people is a collective existence that is uncontrolled. Nobody in Jewish people controlled. Everyone can control its community. When you travel, you are impressed by the kind of control upon every community. Well, this is the enjoyment of every rabbi, every manager. But the Jewish people is an uncontrolled mode of existence in a mosaic way, which is in a very close resonance to what is happening to people. People are cut from frames that were very heavy, solid, and they look for existing, for trying to put in question the traces of the identity they have, and to make them fruitful. And I think, yes, there will be, and I can feel it, I can tell you that there is a lot of people that would like to be closer to Jewish people, and it is the Jewish managers who put them, push them. They know it's difficult, but they want to be close. We spoke about anti-Semitism, but you have to know there is a great sympathy also towards the Jewish people, the Jewish kind of existence, not in a political way, but something fascinates when you look at that people who always find another kind of solution in the problem of life. And I think, and I showed it as a psychoanalyst, I wrote a book to show that the experience of psychotherapy and of psychoanalysis is very strange, because it helps individuals to touch what I call their Judaic point. Not to be converted to Judaism, not to be included in tradition or religion, but to get to their existential point, which is out of the identity.